Thank you for that question. The answer to that is actually probably more complicated than you may have even bargained for in asking that question, but I'm going to try to address some of the issues that come up as a conservator when I'm selecting a material to use on historical artwork. Now, I'll start by saying that I actually do use modern and synthetic adhesives in my practice. I don't just use historical adhesives like fish glue or rabbit skin glue, but it always depends on the object that I'm working on. Now, when I select a material to use in a conservation treatment, and in this case an adhesive, there are a whole bunch of factors that I'm trying to balance and keep in mind when wanting to select something appropriate to use for a piece. In the case of an adhesive, I'm looking for something that is considered conservation grade. Now, that can mean a whole lot of different things, but I'll try to cover some of the points that I'm looking for in an adhesive. So for me, conservation grade can include things like reversibility, something that is non-degradative, something that is non-reactive, and also something that is materially and historically compatible with the object I'm working on. So reversibility, whenever I treat an object with a material, I don't want that treatment to be permanent. As a conservator, I don't want to be making permanent alterations to an original object. If I'm adding anything, whether it's an adhesive or a varnish or doing in-painting to compensate for losses, all of those additions of materials that I make to an object should be able to be resolubilized and removed in the future if a future conservator needs to retreat this object, whether that retreatment has to be in 50 years or 200 years. So a lot of modern adhesives, like sold in the hardware store, are actually quite permanent, and those are not materials that I want to use on an object. I want to use something that can be used to put something together, but then later can be dissolved very easily with something gentle that doesn't harm the object, and then be able to take it apart again later. I'm also looking for a material that is non-degradative, and that's kind of a little more obvious when you're thinking about something conservation grade. You want something that will remain stable and not degrade in the future. So again, I don't know if you've ever put together a broken object using super glue and then found that a couple years later the object falls apart again, because super glue tends to be an adhesive that degrades with time. So it's not something that I use in my practice. I use adhesives that tend to be chemically stable and inert, so they don't degrade with time. I am also looking for something that is generally non-reactive. So we have something called an Audi test in conservation, and what it does is it tests materials to see if they cause degradative reactions in other objects that they are in contact with, or within the same vicinity, like within the same display case, for example. So when I use an adhesive, I don't want to use something that has a chemical in it that off-gasses over time, and then maybe that off-gassing can cause paint to fade or oxidation to happen or acid hydrolysis to happen on the historical object. I need, again, this is related to kind of chemical inertness in a material. In the conservation profession, there are so many adhesives now that we have access to. I mean, this book published by the Canadian Conservation Institute, Adhesive Compendium for Conservation, like these are the adhesives we have access to, and look at the size of this book. It's huge. There are so many materials that we have to choose between, and we really do have to weigh factors on the object that we're working on, because not every adhesive is appropriate for every object. So that brings me to the last point, and that is the adhesive materially and historically compatible with the historical object that I'm working on? So when I'm restoring really old paintings, I do tend to lean more towards historical glues to restore them. Because, so for example, in the case of the Leda and the Swan painting, which you were referring to when you asked the question, the ground layer of that painting was created with glue chalk. So it was made using chalk mixed with an animal collagen adhesive. So since that ground layer got damaged in the water damage that the painting was exposed to, I wanted to reintroduce an animal collagen adhesive into that crumbling ground layer to stabilize the object using the same material or a similar material that the object was created with in this case. While new adhesives are being tested all the time by institutions like the Canadian Conservation Institute, there's still a lot we don't know about some of these modern and synthetic materials, and because time has not passed, we actually don't know how long they'll last into the future. We can do artificial aging, but that is not the same as actual real aging. So because animal glues have been around for so long and we know how they behave, we know that they can last for hundreds of years, that's why they remain a safe choice to use when working on a historical object. Oh, and the last thing I forgot to mention is how good the adhesive is, or how well it works in the particular situation that you need it to work for. Like, are you putting two strong objects together, or are you diluting it and wicking it in and requiring low viscosity in order to do a consolidation treatment? There are lots of different uses for adhesives, and different adhesives are better in different situations. And it's probably obvious that you don't want to use an adhesive that is too weak, because then your repair will fail. But one other thing that people don't realize is that when I'm repairing something, I also don't want an adhesive that is too strong either, because if you use an adhesive that is way stronger than the fragile object that you're working on, you can actually cause damage to the object from strains and stresses that the strong adhesive might introduce by introducing that material to your fragile historical object. And I just want to finish by saying there really is no adhesive that perfectly meets all of the parameters that I previously mentioned. So the sturgeon glue that I selected to use to consolidate the Leda and the Swan painting, it is a reversible adhesive. It can reverse in water. It tends to last a really long time. I mean, to a certain degree, it can degrade with time, but it would be a long time before it degrades. And then because it's the same material compatibility, because it's a similar material to what's already in the object, I'm not making a really drastic change to the materiality of the historical object. Though in terms of reactivity, I mean, collagen glue does tend to be on the acidic side, so it doesn't perfectly meet the parameter of non-reactivity. If the object is put in a high humidity situation, an acidic adhesive can catalyze acid hydrolysis in cellulose that it is in contact with, and the canvas is made of cellulose. So it's not perfect, but again, there really is no perfect material. But comparing all of my other options, I felt that it was probably one of the best materials I could use in this case. And this painting is going to be kept in a stable environment moving forward. So I'm not expecting the painting to be in contact with very high humid environments in the future anyways. So we can make our repairs last longer with preventive care techniques afterwards. So again, lots to consider when selecting adhesive. And I haven't even covered all of the parameters, but those are the main ones in my head at this point. So thank you for asking that question, and I hope that was helpful to give you an idea of the process conservators go through when selecting materials for treatments.